Welcome back to the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and in this episode, we'll be looking at the Sarah Boone case. Sarah Boone grew up in Orlando, Florida, the daughter of Karen and John Paulson, and has two brothers. Sarah's father died when she was a child, and her mother died when she was 25. Sarah married Brian Boone in 2005, had their only child in 2011, and was divorced by 2017. In 2018, Sarah began dating a man named Jorge Torres. Their relationship was volatile, and both had been arrested for battery against each other more than once. It was a relationship that should have never started, and a relationship that ended with one death. Sarah is now 46 and is on trial for the second-degree murder of George, who was 42 when he was killed. Looking at George's name, I thought it would be pronounced Jorge, but everyone, including the news channels and the attorneys, are pronouncing it George, so George it is. On February 24, 2020, Sarah claims that she and George were having just the best night and had been sitting on the back porch smoking cigarettes and drinking wine. They decided to go inside and paint, do puzzles, listen to music, and then play hide-and-seek. During their game of hide-and-seek, according to Sarah, George climbed into a suitcase and asked Sarah to zip him up in it. I'm not sure that either of them had actually played hide-and-seek, if that's really how it went down. I'm not convinced that George asked to be zipped up inside a suitcase either. It might have been more that Sarah told him to see if he could fit in it, and then she zipped him in it. However it happened, Sarah left George in the suitcase, went to bed, and fell asleep. She denies passing out. Well, great decision-making there, Sarah. When she woke up the next day, she found George still in the suitcase, and he was dead. Instead of Sarah immediately calling 911 when she found him, she called her ex-husband, Brian. And there's another great decision by Sarah. Thankfully, Brian only lived 5 minutes away, and he was smarter than Sarah. As soon as he walked in, he told her to call 911, so she did, finally. The police came and questioned her, and just about the entire time, she seemed to be more worried about getting her drink that was inside her apartment than she was that George died. Detectives were called to the scene, and while there, located Sarah's cell phone in the kitchen of her apartment. They asked Sarah if she would sign a consent form to have her phone searched, and Sarah said sure. So Sarah pulls out another fabulously great decision right out of her backside. She claimed in her second interrogation that she excels at everything, and I guess in a way she did excel in helping the detectives build a case against her. Go Sarah! The detectives then had a short interrogation with Sarah in their vehicle on the scene, and when finished, Sarah went on her merry way, sans cell phone. The detectives asked Sarah to come in the next day for a little gab session, and Sarah once again said sure. She was questioned by the detectives, and her story made even less sense than it had before. The detectives mentioned that George had bruising, and Sarah swore she'd never touched him, and that he ran into the walls a lot, and he ran into the hall tree a lot, and he'd fallen off her son's bike. When asked about the scratches on his body, Sarah said it was from sex, but when asked about a specific scratch on the back of his neck, she said she didn't know what that was from. Maybe George was attacked by a bear that kept throwing him into the hall tree, and he just hadn't told Sarah about it. During the interrogation, Sarah kept claiming that we've been good over and over, and said she and George hadn't fought in about a month. She kept insisting that they had been good. I think she realized that she wasn't getting anywhere with the "we were good and I didn't have any reason to hurt him" excuse, so she started to talk more about the abuse and her fear. She said she had photos of injuries from George, and that when he would get drunk and come after her, she would leave or go upstairs to get away from him. She said that she didn't want to drink, but changed that to admitting that the occasional glass of wine was okay, because she realized she'd just told him they'd been drinking that night and everything was good. So I guess sometimes it's okay for George to drink, and sometimes she wants to drink, but other times it's the opposite of that. And she was scared of George, but they were good. It's just a cuckoo mixed-up place in Sarah's world. She told the detectives that she never got drunk and didn't like to drink to where she was no longer in control of her mind. Funny story about that, though. Sarah's ex-husband, Brian, told investigators that Sarah was an alcoholic, and that was part of why they got a divorce. He also said that she could get violent when she was drunk. Sarah went on and on talking through the interrogation about whatever popped into her strange little head. Then the detectives let her know that they'd found a couple of videos on her phone. Videos that she had recorded from the night George died. That same phone that she had voluntarily given to the detectives so it could be searched. It seems like maybe Sarah was so drunk she didn't remember videoing anything. The detectives played the video for her, and it is disturbing. In the video, George is zipped up in the suitcase, and Sarah is saying, "This is for all the things you've done to me." He's pushing up against the top of the suitcase and telling her that he can't breathe. She replied with, "That's how I feel when you choke me." He kept calling out her name, and her response was, "That's my name, don't wear it out." She repeatedly said F you to him and was laughing at him, all the while he was begging for her to let him out of the suitcase. This was supposedly one of their good days. I've had good days before, and while I've never been zipped up in a suitcase, I don't think being trapped in one and not being able to breathe would constitute a good day. Sarah told the detectives that the suitcase wasn't even zipped all the way, and George had 2 fingers sticking out, and that he could have unzipped it the rest of the way. But at some point when George did manage to get his hand out of the suitcase, allegedly Sarah hit his hand with a baseball bat. I'm not sure he would have been yelling that he couldn't breathe and couldn't get out if he was able to get out. Also, the detectives have close-up video of the suitcase, and there's no gap in the zipper. So did Sarah zip up the suitcase after she discovered that George could get his hand out? At some point, he was unable to open it again, so something must have happened. In the interrogation, Sarah repeated that it was not intentional multiple times, and by multiple, I mean approximately 379 times. She seems to have a habit of repeating things as if she believes that if she says them enough times, she will will them into being the truth, or convince the person she's talking to that she's speaking the truth. She also spent a lot of time yelling at the detectives as though loudness equals credibility. Sarah continued to explain to detectives that she left George in the suitcase and then went upstairs to bed. She said she was waiting on him to come up because she thought he could get out of the suitcase. Then she fell asleep. When the detectives asked why she didn't let him out when he was begging her to let him out, she responded, "Well, number 1, I had no idea it was going to end like that. And number 2, I was just like, you know what? I'll give you 5 minutes or so in there. That's it, I'll give you 5 minutes." So she was purposely punishing him for what he'd done to her in the past. She was purposely leaving him in there. If she was thinking that she was going to give him 5 minutes in there, she knew he couldn't get out. When pushed about the bumps on the back and the front of his head, Sarah became extremely defensive and told the detectives that it wasn't fair that they were assuming those bumps came from her. "Hey, big dummy, you literally just killed your boyfriend by zipping him up in a suitcase and leaving him in it overnight. I'm pretty sure it's more than fair for detectives to think you might have had something to do with those bumps and bruises." When asked for the 84th time why she didn't let him out of the suitcase, she blamed it on the wine. Well, little miss I never get drunk, I don't like to be out of control of my mind, is now saying that she drank enough to be out of control of her own mind and her actions. After listening to Sarah's nonsense, she was arrested. While being handcuffed, she actually asked one of the detectives, "Why are you doing this to me?" And his response was a simple, "Because George is dead." Sarah was denied bail, and her trial was at first delayed due to the pandemic, but it has since been canceled 13 times. Why? Because Sarah has had 8 of her attorneys quit, 7 of which were court-appointed. 8 attorneys decided they could not represent her. But why? Well, I think it's mostly because Sarah is a giant pain in the tuchus. One attorney said Sarah tried to call him 5 to 10 times a day. Sarah accused one of the attorneys of being snotty and walked out on at least 2 of their meetings. Another attorney stated that Sarah was unreasonable and difficult to work with. The judge in the case ruled that Sarah had forfeited her right to a public defender, and she would have to represent herself or find a private attorney. I think after going through 7 of the public defenders, they were probably running out of ones to work with her, and we'll get to her private attorney here in a little bit. To add to her campaign to be the world's most annoying client, Sarah has written page after page after page of letters to the judge. One letter was an incredible 58 pages long, and these are all handwritten letters. I get a cramp after just signing my name, and I can't imagine writing 58 pages of nonsense. The letters are mostly her complaining about scenarios that are probably only in her head. In the 58-page novel, she wrote that, quote, "Representing myself is not an option as both judges have now threatened me from being outspoken and intelligent in all my observation of ongoing abuse." End quote. So what that means is, I'm kidding. I have no idea what it means because it doesn't make any sense. Her novel also included a paragraph from the Declaration of Independence, as well as a paragraph from the Florida Constitution. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I really can't see any judge reading 58 pages of whatever it is Sarah was trying to write. In my opinion, Sarah is nuttier than a peanut factory. She's a narcissistic tyrant who is convinced that she's the smartest person in the room and seems to think that if she says something, people should automatically believe her. She thought that by telling the detectives that she didn't mean to kill George, they would just let her go. She was aghast, agog, and even a goo-goo that the detectives would even slightly suggest that she did something wrong. Even after detectives asked her why she didn't let George out of the suitcase when he was begging her to, she still couldn't admit to any wrongdoing. Now about Sarah's private attorney. Her 9th attorney is James Owen, and you know how she snagged him? With this handwritten advertisement she sent in a letter to the judge. So how did James Owen see it? Once upon a time, Sarah thought that the prosecuting attorney was releasing all of the letters she had written to the judge to the public. I think she thought it was a way to shame her. She was told that any letters sent to the judge became part of the case files, and according to Florida law, except in certain cases, all files are public record. So Sarah knew that her advertisement for an attorney would be seen by the public, and for some reason James answered the call of the wild. I could surmise that it's because he's a terrible attorney, or maybe he just wants to see his name in lights, or possibly it's both. From what I've seen so far from him, I'm not impressed with his abilities as an attorney. I'd like to think it's just because he has Sarah as a client, but I think it's more that he just sucks. He's been snippy with the judge more than once and comes across as smarmy and condescending, and that probably didn't do him any favors with the court. Earlier this year, Sarah tried to get her case dismissed, citing she was denied her right to a speedy trial, but her request was denied. I mean, you can't run off 8 attorneys because you're impossible to work with, and then complain because your trial didn't happen fast enough for you. Sarah's trial was scheduled to begin on October 7th, but was postponed due to Hurricane Milton. That same day, Sarah was offered a plea of manslaughter that would have resulted in 15 years in prison. I would assume that would include the over 4 years of time served, so her remaining time would be a little over 10 years. Sarah declined the offer. I don't think that was a good decision. In fact, I think that was a super-duper dumb decision. Earlier this week, Sarah asked to be allowed to have snacks during the trial. She asked for chips, Pop-Tarts, candy, and juice boxes. Her request wasn't due to a medical necessity either. She just thinks she's special enough to be able to throw back some snacks when she gets the munchies during her hearing. The judge denied her request. Jury selection was finalized on Thursday, October 17th, and the trial began at the time of this recording, October 18th. If you don't already think that Sarah is about a half bubble off level, here's something that might change your mind. Sarah is planning on claiming self-defense. Even though she had already told detectives that she and George were having a great night and they hadn't even fought in a month. After she went on and on about how good they'd been doing and that leaving him in the suitcase wasn't intentional, she's now decided that self-defense is the best way to go. I don't know how to break this to Sarah, but the entire self-defense train might be derailed if the prosecution brings up the fact that when detectives asked her why she wouldn't let George out of the suitcase, she didn't say it was because she was scared. Also, if she was scared he was going to hurt her, once she had him zipped in the suitcase, she could have called the police, but she didn't. This should be a very interesting trial to keep up with. I wonder if Sarah will be able to keep her mouth shut, or if she'll break a record for the most contempt charges in a trial. Stay tuned for updates. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, comment, join the channel, and do the hokey pokey, as these help my channel grow. Until next time, stay safe and be happy.